Hey there guys, nice to see ya, how's it going? Today we talk My Hero Academia. I'm not the biggest fan of anime, but this one over here, this one not only managed to climb its way up the ranks and firmly place itself in the #1 position of my favorite anime, it also made it look easy, and the divide between it and the others on the podium keeps growing ever more noticeable. I'm sure the 4th season will make me admire this series even more. But today, I'm delaying an inevitable video on My Hero Academia and why I love it so much in favor of a much less complex and far less demanding video on its far less complex and far less demanding spin-off. Today we talk My Hero Academia Vigilantes, and whether, if you're interested at all, start reading it would be a good idea. I'll give you my honest opinion on the few issues I brought out of curiosity so we can discuss it in the comments and find out if this spin-off is worth giving a shot. To begin with, I think it's valuable to establish what makes a good spin-off. I did some research online and found and read this wonderfully made and exhaustive paper by Francis J. Aquila, only to find it doesn't talk about spin-off in media like at all. So we need to come up with our own criteria then. A good spin-off needs to do 3 things. First and foremost, a good spin-off needs to respect the original source material. Secondly, expand and explore different ideas. Lastly, but by far most importantly, be good! Have a good story and characters. So, how does this manga fare? The first point is the one I'ma be most negative about. Everyone experiences and values narratives differently. Me personally, I especially enjoy the world and setting a story takes place in. I like to know it, study it, speculate about it. It's generally a good indicator of how much I love a setting and the world building around it, and it sometimes can make me overlook a weak story. But it's a double-edged blade, my friend. Being so invested in the world the narrative takes place in means being invested in its fundamental rules, history and overall coherence. Sure, I can make my own explanation for details that don't quite add up. I find that even fun. And I do understand that not every question needs an answer, let alone one that makes sense. But the work Kohei Horikoshi puts in the making of a solid setting for its story is one I respect and admire, and would like to see respected and not contradicted by this spin-off. So does it do that? I'll cut it some slack. Developing a spin-off of an ongoing story, the lore of which is still in the making and ever expanding without eventually contradicting it, it's kinda impossible. But that's why I don't think writing this spin-off now before the main series ends was a very logical idea. I believe Hideyuki Furuhashi has a ton of respect and admiration for the source material. I'm sure of it. But knowledge... reading these few issues, I wondered. This manga needs you to stretch what you thought reasonable and bend the rules a bit or make some brain gymnastic in order to justify things you thought impossible. Sadly, there's a lot of examples of this in the story. Things like, oh, my quirk is super speed, but I can also transform into an outdated representation of a pteranodon if the story so chooses. Little dumb things like this are numerous, frustrating and forced. Instead of finding clever ways to work with the established rules and work them into the story, far too often the rules are bent or ignored and it feels lazy and unimaginative. No doubt this is up to subjectivity, but to me personally, this is the biggest negative of the 3 issues I read so far. On a more positive note, there are several well-known characters from the main series that show up from time to time. Most of the time I found them pretty faithful and coherent to who they are and what they would do. What few instances of characters behaving uncharacteristically can be justified with the story taking place before the main one and before most of the character development they go through. Moving on. Does Vigilantes expand the reach of the narrative and setting, explore new ideas, interesting facets of this world that we would never have a chance to explore in the main series? Does it do that? Well, you know, despite seemingly not always caring for the lore of the original at times, I have to say, surprisingly, it does show a unique and engaging perspective on the world of My Hero Academia. The story has a smaller scope, but nevertheless is interesting to see and live this mad world where everyone has superpowers from the perspective of the everyday people. It's extremely interesting, and due to the down-to-earth nature of the narrative, these aspects of the world I appreciate so much are explored more often and more deeply than they are in the main series. It's like an issue of The Avengers versus one of Spider-Man. One story feels grand and cosmic in scale, the other, however, feel more real and relatable. I especially loved how the Vigilantes valued the fact they are able to operate outside the law and closer to the everyday people. They can help them with humble stuff like holding heavy bags of groceries or clean the streets, and they can be rougher and more direct with their approach when it comes to fighting villains, yet they still question their own morality and actions from time to time. Great stuff, and that's just part of it. I like seeing what different heroes think about the Vigilantes. Many of them appreciate and tolerate their good work, even if technically they're criminal, and some of them may even be villainous in nature. Let me give you just one more example of great world building. In the very first issue of the manga, a Vigilante gets himself in a fight against Eraserhead. He's faring rather well when suddenly Eraserhead stops the fight and completely ignores him. Does not arrest him for attacking him, nothing. This is quite uncharacteristic for the guy, he's not one for pulling his punches. So at first I didn't quite like this, but then I realized he had realized the man he was fighting was quirkless. And in the tense and unstable sociological atmosphere of this setting, a man of the law abusing his mighty power to attack a weak minority is probably something that man would like nobody to know happen, regardless of his reasons. Wouldn't you know it, this is relevant and relatable stuff right here, I love it! So in spite of the rules established by the main series, and the reckless way they are utilized in this manga, the world building at large is actually pretty cleverly interwoven with the narrative. Only, how good is that narrative? What's the story of Vigilantes? Its protagonist is kinda a reflection of Deku. They both wanted to become heroes, they were both unremarkable people, and they both have an irrepressible sense of heroism. But all things considered, I like some aspect of Koichi more than I like others of Deku. He's older, more mature, less whiny, but also less inspiring, less friendly, way less optimistic. Koichi is sort of who Deku would have grown to be had him not passed his entrance exam, or never met his mentor. Speaking of, Koichi too has one, a quirkless vigilante called Knuckle Duster. And whereas All Might is inspired by Superman, this guy's Batman. Dark and brooding, a man with no superpowers that uses grappling hooks and strategy to find his opponent's weak spot and punch the living heck out of them. This guy is hilarious and the worst teacher possible, and I love him. These two are often accompanied by a wannabe idol named Popstar, constantly teasing and arguing with Koichi, yet secretly in growing admiration for him. The story follows their mishap as they try and balance their everyday lives and their investigation as vigilantes on a strange new drug circling around town that transforms the people into violent beasts. Again, it's a story with slightly smaller stakes, but it's not a bad one. Even though the big mystery of who is the man behind this whole mess, I believe it's not that big a mystery, to be honest. But again, I've only read 3 issues, and with each issue grew all the more tired with the pacing of this story. This manga is more lighthearted, comical, and episodic than My Hero Academia is. The 3rd issue in particular barely furthers the plot, instead centers on trivial if enjoyable events such as Koichi having to deal with his mother deciding to spend some time with him, or this guy here who is the biggest a-hole. It's enjoyable, yes, but overall utterly pointless. The manga is filled to the brim with familiar characters' cameos, irrelevant scenes, and pointless jokes. Don't get me wrong, I usually love slice of life moments in a story. Moments where the narrative slows down a bit and the characters have a chance of chilling, simply chilling. In fact, talking about My Hero Academia, those are some of my favorite moments and I'd love to see more of them. But here, it's just unbalanced, you know? There's too much of that and too little plot development for me. And maybe I could get over it if it weren't for some cliches and clumsiness that also plagues the writing in these 3 numbers. But before coming to decide whether this manga is a worthy spin-off of its much more popular brother, there's still one thing that we haven't addressed yet, and to me, in particular, is a crucial aspect in my final verdict, and that is the art style. And I have very positive things to say about the art style of Vigilantes. It doesn't break away from Horikoshi's terrific style, and yet manages to feel unique and pretty damn awesome at times. I like it a ton. It's great. If I have to nitpick just a little bit, sometimes this manga suffers from incoherence, even from an artistic style point of view. The artist, Bettencourt, sometimes changes character designs as the story goes, and it may bother some, it kinda bothers me too. Another thing is, sometimes these character designs are just a tiny bit less inspired than what I would like. But other than that, exceptional work, no question about it. So, at the end of the day, Vigilantes, yay or nay? Whatever. Is it or is it not a great spin-off to My Hero Academia? I have to say, not quite, no. These 3 issues I read were kinda weak at times, but it certainly showed a huge potential in my opinion. I think what this story needs is a more tangible sense of purpose. The story needs to be more present and the narrative needs to confidently communicate that it's going somewhere. I think this manga could benefit from taking a risk and deviate from the main series. The original characters here are wonderfully constructed, and the familiar faces, while more than welcome, must not be the selling point of this manga. Its story and the rather impressively deep question it raises should be. Keep it light-hearted, sure, but when the story needs to be dramatic, don't undermine the dramatic tone. My Hero Academia is a master at this. Learn from it, and learn and know your world. Don't break rules just because it's convenient or shocking. Work with them, and if you can't, overcome them. Deku is not any stronger now than when he first got his quirk. He just learned how to control it and make the most out of his limitations. So don't just make your characters surpass their limits, or it will feel forced. It always does. In a story, rules should be tools for creating a narrative, not the enemy of it. So, in conclusion, this manga is a very enjoyable, if a bit trite read. There's enough good about it that one could like it regardless of their knowledge of My Hero Academia, and at the end of the day, it has left me with enough curiosity that I just might give it another shot and buy just 1 or 2 more issues. Maybe 3. And what do you guys think of Vigilantes? Do you like it? Do you not? Have you read every number released so far? Or had you never heard of it before? Let's see what you guys have to say down in the comment section, and I do hope to see you again next time.